The wrong seat, the wrong skin. Yolan adjusted the strap of his backpack as he stepped through the jet bridge. It was his first solo flight. He had triple-checked everything before leaving: home boarding pass, student ID, conference papers, and his father's note wishing him luck. At just 17, Yolan was heading to Washington, D.C., chosen among hundreds of applicants for a national leadership summit. His heart swelled with pride. He wore his best clothes, a clean navy polo shirt, khaki pants, and spotless sneakers. His father had insisted on booking him a first-class ticket, not for luxury, but for safety, comfort, and a small reward for Jalen's hard work. The airline staff at the gate had scanned his ticket without question. Now, as he walked into the bright cabin of the plane, he smiled at the attendant at the door and quietly made his way to seat 1A. The plush leather seat welcomed him. He placed his bag under the seat, sat down, and clipped his seatbelt. The man beside him glanced up from a newspaper and offered a short nod. Yolan nodded back. It was peaceful. He was about to text his dad when a voice interrupted his calm. "Excuse me, young man, you're not supposed to be here." Yolan looked up. A flight attendant with tightly pulled hair and cold eyes stood above him. She looked confused but not curious, as if she had already decided something in her mind. Yolan reached into the front pocket of his bag and pulled out his boarding pass. "This is my seat. I'm in 1A, he said kindly, offering the ticket. She didn't even read it. Instead, her tone grew sharp. "First class is for premium customers. You must have taken a wrong turn. Coach is in the back. Go there now." Yolan blinked. The words stung, but he stayed calm. He held the boarding pass out again. "I think there's been a mistake. My dad booked this for me." The man in the seat beside him glanced over now but looked quickly away. The attendant ignored the ticket again. Her lips tightened. "Young man, I will not ask again. Get up and return to your assigned seat." Another flight attendant walked over. She looked at her colleague, then at Yolan. Her eyes narrowed as if trying to find fault with him. "What's going on here? He's in the wrong seat. He claims he belongs in first class." The first attendant said, "I don't claim anything. I do belong here," Yolan replied. His voice had lost its warmth. His pride, built over months of hard work, felt like it was being peeled off in front of strangers. "Sir, don't raise your voice. You're causing a disruption." The second attendant said. Passengers started watching. A few leaned out into the aisle. No one spoke for Yolan. No one asked for the attendants to check the ticket. No one wondered aloud why a black teenager in a first-class seat was such a problem. Yolan felt his hands shaking slightly. He unclipped his belt, stood, and held the boarding pass with both hands. "Please, look at it. Just read it." The attendants didn't. One turned and spoke into her walkie-talkie. Moments later, two uniformed airport security officers entered the plane. One was tall and bald with a serious face. The other looked barely older than Yolan himself. "Sir, we need you to step off the aircraft," said the taller guard. "What? Why?" Yolan asked, stunned. "You're not cooperating with flight staff. Come with us now." Jalen's chest tightened. The murmurs around him were louder now. Phones were raised. Someone whispered, "What did he do?" But nobody waited for an answer. He looked around, hoping someone would speak up. But even the man in the seat next to him stared out the window. "I didn't do anything wrong," Yolan said again. His voice shook, but he stood tall. "You're delaying the flight," one of the guards replied. "You can speak to the gate agents." Yolan picked up his bag. The plane had turned quiet. As he walked down the aisle, he felt every pair of eyes on him. Some curious, some silent, some even smirking. It was a walk he would never forget. The gate agent barely looked up as he was escorted out. "What's your name?" she asked without warmth. "Yolan Carter." "I was in seat 1A. She typed quickly. "Maybe your dad booked the wrong fare. I'll get you on the next flight." "Wait here." Yolan looked at her. Her voice was tired, annoyed, dismissive, like she had done this before. Like this was routine. He sat down on the hard plastic seat near the window. His fingers trembled as he pulled out his phone. He stared at it for a second, then unlocked it and scrolled through his contacts. He found the name Dad and tapped it. His father answered. After one ring, Yolan. "Everything okay?" Jalen's throat tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "Dad, they pulled me off the plane. Said I didn't belong in first class. They wouldn't even look at my ticket. People were filming. Security dragged me out in front of everyone." There was a silence on the line. "What airline?" his father asked, voice low now. "The one you always fly with. The one you helped build." Yolan said. His father was quiet again. Then his voice came back with a calmness that made Yalan sit up straighter. "Stay there. Don't talk to anyone else. I'll call you back in 5 minutes." Yalan didn't move. The gate agent walked by and didn't look at him. A janitor emptied a trash can nearby. A group of college students laughed as they passed. None of them knew what had just happened to him. Or maybe they did and didn't care. His phone buzzed. A text from his dad. "I just spoke to the airline's president. Stay seated. Someone is coming to you directly." Then another text. "Record everything from now on." Yalan felt something shift inside him. The shame faded slightly. Something colder and sharper rose in its place. He opened his phone camera and hit record. The gate agent called his name. Without looking at him, "You'll be rebooked in 3 hours. Go wait by gate 29. Yalan didn't move. "I'm waiting for someone. My father is handling it," he said. She rolled her eyes. "Suit yourself." 10 minutes later, the shift began. A man in a crisp gray suit walked briskly toward the gate. He had an airline badge and 2 people trailing him. One held a tablet. The other wore a headset. They stopped directly in front of Yalan. "Mr. Carter." Yalan stood up slowly. "Yes, I'm deeply sorry for what you've experienced. Please, follow me. Your father has been informed. We are correcting this immediately." The gate agent's mouth opened slightly. One of the suited staff leaned toward her and whispered something. Her face turned pale. The other passengers nearby watched now, not with judgment but with confusion. No one understood what had just happened. No one knew who Yalan really was. Not yet. As he followed the team down the hallway, back toward the aircraft, the shame began to melt. He didn't know exactly what his father had said or done, but something had changed. The balance of power was shifting. He was no longer the boy who got dragged off a plane. He was the son of someone they had underestimated, and they were about to realize it. End of part 1. Let me know when you're ready for part 2, who his father really is, or if you want any changes to this part first, you said. Now write part 2, more unique, without dots. ChatGPT said. Absolutely. Here is part 2, who his father really is, written in third-person style, with rich emotion and suspense, using natural and simple English, and without using dots, ellipses. This part continues building the tension and reveals more about Jalen's father and the power shift beginning to unfold. Part 2, who his father really is. The walk back to the aircraft felt different this time. Jalen's heart still beat fast, but now it wasn't fear that filled his chest. It was something else, a quiet storm building inside him. As he walked between the 2 suited airline officials, he noticed how other staff suddenly stepped aside. People who wouldn't look at him earlier now turned their heads and stood straighter. A new boarding gate had been opened just for him. No waiting in line, no questions. A senior-looking flight supervisor greeted him at the jet bridge. Her expression was tight with concern. She looked nothing like the attendants who had dragged him off. Mr. Carter, on behalf of our airline, I want to sincerely apologize. We have reviewed everything. You were mistreated and embarrassed. It should never have happened. Please come with me. Yalan followed her onto the aircraft. The cabin was quiet. The same passengers sat in their seats. The same man who had ignored him earlier now watched closely. The same flight attendants who doubted him stood near the front, looking unsure of themselves. One of them stepped forward, trying to smile. Welcome back, sir. We're sorry for the misunderstanding earlier. Yalan didn't respond. He simply walked back to seat 1A and sat down. He placed his bag under the seat again and stared straight ahead. The shame that had burned him earlier was now replaced with a steady silence. The flight supervisor turned to the passengers and cleared her throat. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the earlier delay. There was an internal error. This young man was removed from the aircraft unfairly. That mistake has been corrected. Thank you for your patience. Some passengers looked confused. A few raised their eyebrows. One person even clapped quietly, but most just turned away, pretending nothing had happened. No one apologized to Yalan. No one said a word to him. The attendants remained stiff. One tried to offer him a drink. Can I get you something, Mr. Carter? Water or juice? Yalan shook his head. He had no interest in kindness that came only after power entered the room. Once the plane was in the air, Jalen's phone buzzed. He pulled it out quietly and saw a message from his father. Proud of how you handled that. I'm landing in Atlanta. I'll explain everything once you land. He didn't reply. He stared out the window as the clouds rolled by beneath them. He tried to calm his. Quickly they had judged him. How fast the accusations came. How ready everyone was to believe that a young black teen could not possibly belong in first class. By the time the flight landed in DC, Yolan had made up his mind. He wouldn't just forget this, not when it could happen again, not when it probably already had. Two others without powerful fathers. He didn't want revenge. He wanted change. At the arrival gate, a young woman in a black suit held a sign with his name on it. She smiled gently and guided him past the crowd. "There's a car waiting for you, sir, and your father is on a video call. He's waiting to speak with you inside the black SUV." The screen lit up. His father's face appeared, calm as ever, seated in an office that looked like something from a magazine. Polished wood, glass shelves, and models of airplanes on the wall. "You okay, son?" Yolan nodded. His voice came out lower than usual. "I'm fine now, but that shouldn't have happened. They didn't even check my ticket." They looked at me and assumed. His father's eyes didn't blink. "He listened closely, I know, and that's why I've already taken action. The 2 flight attendants involved have been suspended. An internal review has started, and I spoke with the board. This isn't going to be buried or softened." Yolan watched him. He had always known his father worked in aviation, but he never asked for details. He just thought his dad handled logistics or owned shares. "You never told me you own the airline," Yolan said. His father leaned back slightly. "I don't like using power unless it's necessary, but in this case, it was. This isn't just about you, Yolan. This is about every young person who will sit where you sat and be questioned the same way. This story will go public, but we'll control the message, and you'll have a choice in that too." Yolan stayed quiet. He looked down at his hands, thinking of the flight attendants, the security guards, the gate agent, people who saw him and saw only trouble. Not a scholar, not a leader, not a son who belonged in seat 1A. His father spoke again. "There's something else. Tomorrow, the media will learn who you are, not just as a passenger but as someone who stood tall. The conference organizers want to make you their opening speaker. Are you ready for that?" Yolan sat back in the leather seat. He took a breath and nodded yes. "I'm ready." The SUV drove through the city streets, lights passing across the window like slow-moving stars. Somewhere in the distance, the summit hall was being prepared. Banners were going up, people were gathering, and without knowing it, they were waiting for a boy who had walked onto a plane with pride and had been dragged off in silence. But he wasn't silent anymore. The speech that shook the room. Morning sunlight spilled into the glass atrium of the Washington Convention Center. Hundreds of students from across the country filled the massive hall. Banners hung overhead, showing faces of young leaders, thinkers, and innovators. This was not just a gathering. It was a stage where voices were heard and dreams were recognized. Stood behind the curtain near the stage, wearing a navy suit his father had sent ahead. A conference organizer pinned a small microphone to his collar and gave him a warm nod. She had read the news that morning. So had everyone else. It was already spreading across the internet. The 17-year-old black student removed from a flight without cause, a video viewed nearly 500,000 times, a headline that had sparked national attention. People in the audience murmured as they found their seats. They didn't yet know the full story, but they had read enough to be curious. And when the host stepped onto the stage and introduced Yolan, the room fell into a hush. He walked to the podium with calm steps, not rushed, not nervous. He gripped the edges of the podium and looked out at the sea of young faces. Some watched with admiration, some with curiosity, a few with disbelief, but all eyes were on him. He began without a paper, no notes, just truth. 3 days ago, I was excited to come here. I packed early. I printed my invitation. I wore my best clothes, and I sat in the first-class seat my father had bought for me. I thought that was enough to earn a peaceful flight. A ripple went through the crowd. No noise, just stillness. But the flight crew didn't ask my name. They didn't check my ticket. They looked at me and decided I didn't belong there. They asked me to move. When I said no, they called security. They escorted me off the plane in front of everyone. They treated me like I was lying, like I was trouble, like I didn't matter. Jalen's voice remained steady. He wasn't angry. He was clear. Most people didn't say anything. They looked away. Some filmed it, some just watched. I realized something then. It's not enough to work hard. It's not enough to speak politely or dress neatly. Because for some people, your skin speaks louder than your words. A hush deeper than before settled over the crowd. My father owns that airline. I didn't tell them that I shouldn't have needed to. But when I called him, everything changed. People apologized. Managers rushed to correct things. Doors opened again. But I'm not here today because of what my father owns. I'm here because I understand what that moment meant for all of us. For every young person who has been judged before they were known. For everyone who has been told to step back when they've earned the right to stand forward. He paused to let the weight of that message settle. This isn't just about race. It's about assumptions. It's about systems that train people to decide who belongs and who doesn't, based on what they see and not what they know. It's about the silent rules no one writes down, but everyone feels. And I want to change that, not just with my words, but with my actions. Applause began slowly, then grew. It filled the hall like a wave. Some students stood, others wiped tears. Even the adults in the room watched with a new respect. Dylan stepped back from the podium. He didn't smile. He didn't bow. He walked off the stage the same way he walked onto it, with quiet strength. Backstage, the conference director waited with eyes wide. "You've just become the voice of this summit," she said. "We've had powerful speakers before, but nothing like that. You've changed something here today." Reporters waited in the lobby. Questions flew like sparks. How did it feel to be treated that way? What was it like to have power suddenly notice you? What would he do next? Jelen gave no long answers, only honest ones. It wasn't about power. It was about respect. "I want that for everyone." By evening, the story had reached news stations. Television anchors discussed it with raised eyebrows. Social media lit up with the hashtag #Seat1A. Young people across the country posted photos with the tag. Some shared their own stories. Stories of being followed in stores, ignored in classrooms, searched at airports, doubted everywhere. New voice had entered the conversation. Not shouting, not begging, just standing in his hotel room. Yalan sat by the window. His phone buzzed constantly. Messages from people he had never met. Invitations from schools. Requests from leaders. Praise from strangers. But he wasn't interested in becoming famous. He wanted something deeper. His father called again. This time, his tone was different. Not just proud, moved. "You started something today," he said, "and I'll back you in whatever comes next." Yalan looked out at the Washington skyline. He had arrived expecting to sit, listen, and learn. Instead, he had spoken, stood, and led. He hadn't asked to be the story. But now that he would make sure it meant something. The pushback begins for a day and a night. Jalen's name soared across every platform. His speech was shared in schools, broadcast on news networks, and quoted by celebrities. Teachers played clips in classrooms. Students stood up to speak it. Hawaii's activists called him a rising light. Messages poured in like rain. Encouragement, praise, stories of solidarity, but not all attention feels like support. On the third morning, Yalan woke to a different sound. His phone buzzed non-stop, but the tone had changed. The words came faster, harsher, colder. Messages no longer said thank you. They said why you. They said stay quiet. They said sit down. He scrolled through them one by one. Some were from anonymous accounts. Others carried real names and fake smiles. "You only got sympathy because your dad is rich. You want to play victim when you fly first class." He checked the news again. Some networks questioned the truth of his story. A few hosts laughed at the idea of a 17-year-old calling out racism while sipping orange juice in a premium seat. One panel discussed whether privilege could exist inside a wealthy family. A headline read, "Black teen exploits airline blunder for fame." The weight pressed down quickly. It did not feel like criticism. It felt like punishment for speaking, for standing, for not staying silent at breakfast. The summit coordinator approached with concern. Her voice lowered to a whisper. "Some parents are complaining. They think the summit is getting political. They say we're teaching kids to fight instead of lead." Yalan nodded without answering. He had expected the storm, but not this soon. He had expected pushback, but not from so many sides. He spent the afternoon in a quiet room above the main hall. Outside, the sessions continued. Inside, he faced a choice. His father called again. This time there was steel in his voice. "I can pull you out of this. We can let the storm pass. You've done more than enough. This isn't your job." Yalan looked around the room. Posters of past speakers lined the walls. Trailblazers, survivors, voices that once shook the silence. He stood by the window, staring down at the rows of students entering the auditorium. He saw backpacks and braids, suits and sneakers. He saw young faces carrying hope. "I'm not leaving." He turned back to his father's voice. "If I stop now, it tells them they were right. It tells every kid like me to be quiet when they're told they don't belong. I can't be the kid who gave up because the world barked louder than my truth." His father did not argue. He only said one thing, then do it fully. Later that evening, Yolan received a formal email from the airline board, a request to attend a public roundtable on discrimination in aviation. Not behind closed doors, not in a boardroom, live, on camera, streamed across the country. They wanted to show transparency. They wanted to control the narrative. They wanted the boy from seat 1A to sit across from executives in polished suits. Yolan read the invitation twice. He showed it to the summit director. She read it in silence. Her eyes held worry. "You don't owe them anything." Yolan folded the paper and placed it in his jacket pocket. That might be true, but someone has to say what they won't. He walked to the elevator, thoughts marching fast in his head. He was only 17. He had not planned to be a voice for anyone, but now he carried voices with him. Every silent seat, every unfair glance, every young person who had been made to feel like an intruder in places they rightfully earned. As the elevator doors opened, he stepped out onto the quiet hotel floor. The hallway lights flickered slightly as he made his way to his room. A news crew waited in the lobby. He walked past them without answering questions inside. He opened his laptop. The article at the top of the newsfeed showed his face. A headline read, "Teen turns turbulence into national debate." Below that, another headline asked, "Who gets to sit in seat 1A?" He leaned back and stared at the ceiling. He was no longer just a name in a news story. He had become a question the world was now forced to answer. End of part 4. Let me know when you're ready for part 5. Face to face with the system, where Yolan confronts airline executives live and the tension reaches its peak. "You said, now write part 5, more unique without." ChatGPT said, "Of course. Here is part 5, face to face with the system, written in a strong third-person narrative, with emotional intensity, deep conflict, and clear rising tension. And as you requested, it is crafted without using dots, and remains unique and compelling." Part 5, face to face with the system. The studio lights were hotter than expected. The air inside the media hall buzzed with whispers and camera clicks. At the center of it all sat a long table dressed in white linen. On one side, a row of executives from the airline wore tailored suits and practiced expressions. On the other side sat Yolan, 17 years old, wearing the same navy suit he had worn on the day of his speech. He sat alone, no handlers, no lawyers, only his voice. The moderator cleared her throat and welcomed the audience. A national livestream had begun only moments earlier. Thousands of viewers were already watching from phones, televisions, and classrooms. Some tuned in out of curiosity. Others watched to witness what might finally be said when a young man faced the very people who had judged him without reason. Yolan rested his hands on the table, calm on the outside, fierce inside. The moderator began with formal greetings, reading brief summaries of each panelist's role. When she reached his name, the room changed. Her tone shifted slightly. A subtle respect now lived in her voice. Yolan Carter, student leader, victim of unjust removal, speaker whose message sparked a national response. The questions began. At first, they were directed at the airline executives. Polished answers followed. Apologies were offered. Phrases like internal miscommunication and procedural error floated through the air like perfume sprayed over something rotten. Then the moderator turned toward Yolan. "Do you accept the airline's apology?" Yolan looked across the table. He saw faces trying to remain unreadable. He saw one man glance toward the cameras and then quickly back down. He saw discomfort dressed in expensive jackets. No, the room froze for a moment. The silence had weight because this was never just about me. This was about a system that sees young black men and makes snap decisions. I was judged without evidence, removed without explanation, recorded without protection. And only after my father intervened did anyone listen. That's not justice. That's fear of power. One executive shifted in his chair. Another tapped a pen against his notebook but stopped when he noticed the microphones. The moderator asked again, "What would accountability look like to you?" Yolan leaned forward slightly. "Training is not enough. Apologies are not enough. There needs to be policy. There needs to be cameras on every removal. There needs to be a voice on every flight that passengers can trust if they are treated unfairly. There needs to be a seat at this table for people who live with these assumptions every day." The room remained still. Cameras zoomed in on faces, some tight, some thoughtful, some uneasy. The executive vice president spoke next. His words were measured. We understand that the situation should never have happened. We acknowledge our failure. We want to move forward. Together, Yalan kept his eyes steady. Moving forward means admitting who gets left behind. Moving forward means changing what made you act the way you did in the first place. Moving forward means no more empty gestures. The moderator nodded and moved the discussion toward solutions. Policy changes were mentioned. Task forces were promised. Public commitments were outlined. But the cameras stayed on Yalan, because the room belonged to him now, not through wealth, not through threat, through truth. At the end of the panel, applause came not from executives but from staff members seated along the wall. 2 young flight attendants clapped openly. A woman in the back row wiped her eyes. Someone whispered his name under their breath, as if it now meant something more than just a boy on a flight when the live stream ended. The moderator turned to Yalan. You just made history again. He didn't smile. He didn't pose. He stood up, thanked her, and walked off stage. In the hallway, his father waited with a look of quiet pride. No words were exchanged, just a hand on the shoulder and a nod outside. Reporters shouted questions. He walked past them with calm steps. Across the street, a group of students held handmade signs. They had come without being asked. One sign read, "My seat is mine." Another, "Read, thank you, Yalan." A little girl lifted a sign that said, "I belong everywhere." Yalan crossed the street and stood among them. Not above, among. They closed in around him. They asked him what would happen next. He paused before speaking. This was not just about flights anymore. This was about belonging. About how many people still feared seats they had already earned. About how the world taught some to move aside, even when they were standing on solid ground. Next comes the change. The legacy of Seat 1 Ether Airport felt different now. Not quieter, not louder. Just change. 2 months had passed since Yalan Carter stepped off that plane with humiliation tightening around his chest. 2 months since a phone call turned a personal injustice into a national conversation. Now he was back where it all began. Same airline, same terminal, same gate number, but this time he was not alone. Photographers waited by the check-in area. Volunteers handed out press kits. Uniformed staff stood taller. Their eyes met his without hesitation. Their smiles held real warmth. At Gate 7, a new plaque had been installed beside the boarding door. Shiny metal etched with steady hand. Honor of every passenger who was told they did not belong. Yalan stood in front of it for a long moment. A group of schoolchildren passed behind him, led by their teacher. One of the boys turned and whispered to his friend, "That's him." Yalan turned and gave a small nod. The boy lit up like a spark had caught inside him. Not from meeting someone famous, from recognizing something familiar. Someone who looked like him, someone who had not backed down. Today was not a day for speeches. That part was done. This was a day for change to take its first real step. The airline had invited civil rights leaders, student activists, and policy advisors to witness the launch of its new inclusion program. But Yalan had not come for a ceremony. He had come for a conversation inside a closed meeting room. He sat at a round table with young voices from across the country. Some wore sneakers, some wore suits. All carried stories. Each person spoke in turn, about being profiled in stores, about teachers who overlooked their hands, about neighbors who locked their doors when they walked by. Yalan did not speak first. He listened. Then, when the room grew still, he shared again what had happened on that flight. Not with anger, with clarity. "I want this to be the last time a 17-year-old has to explain why he belongs in a seat that was paid for and earned." One of the executives, a woman with silver streaks in her hair, looked directly at him. "We are ready to follow." Your Yalan nodded. It would take more than words, more than cameras. But something had already started, because this time they were asking the right questions. This time they were listening. Later that afternoon, Yalan returned to the main terminal. A flight attendant who had seen the video months ago stopped him near security. Her voice trembled slightly. "I watched how you handled that moment. You gave me courage to speak out too. Thank you." He looked at her and saw not just a worker in uniform but someone who had been carrying a story quietly for years. Someone who now stood taller because someone else had spoken first. At the gate, he met his father. No briefcase today. No formal greeting. Just a proud look exchanged between two people who had crossed a storm together and come out stronger. "You ready to fly again?" Yalan smiled for the first time that day. "I'm ready now." As they boarded the flight, Yalan reached into his pocket and pulled out his old boarding pass from that first flight. He had kept it, crumpled, torn at the edge. Seat 1A still printed clearly in black ink. He didn't hold it for memory. He held it as proof that a seat can become more than a place to sit. It can become a symbol, a reminder, a promise. He placed it into his notebook and took his seat. No one questioned him. No one stared. The flight crew greeted him by name. The cabin door closed. As the plane lifted into the sky, Yalan looked out the window. The clouds moved slowly beneath them. The world looked smaller from up here. But the voice he carried had only grown louder. Seat 1A had once been a place of shame. Now it was a mark of courage. A point in time when one teenager chose not to move quietly. When he stood for more than himself. When he became the voice so many had waited to hear. The plane climbed higher. The past stayed below. The future waited. Ahead the ripple beyond the runway. Months passed. The headlines faded. The interviews slowed. New stories took over screens and timelines. But what Yalan Carter had started did not disappear across the country. Small changes took root. A school in Chicago added a new curriculum on racial bias. A group of flight attendants in New York launched an awareness program. A boy in Atlanta who had been bullied for speaking up in class now stood as class president. His campaign slogan had been simple. I belong. Universities began inviting Yalan to speak, not as a victim, as a builder, a bridge between generations. He never walked into rooms with raised fists. He walked in with raised expectations, for how people should be treated, for how silence must be broken, for how change must begin not with the loudest voices but the clearest truths. One day, while walking through a museum in Washington, Yalan paused near an exhibit on modern civil rights leaders. At the far end of the room, there it was, a small, glass case holding a crumpled boarding pass, faded but legible. Seat 1A next to it, a quote engraved in the glass. Dignity does not ask permission. It takes its seat and holds it firmly. Visitors passed by. Some stopped, some leaned in to read. A few took quiet photos. Yalan stood unnoticed among them, not because he was hiding, because the story had become larger than the person who lived it. Outside the museum, a little girl with a pink backpack held her father's hand. She looked up and pointed at the banner with Jalen's face on it. Daddy, that's the boy from school who stood up on the plane. Her father nodded yes, and because of him you can go anywhere and sit anywhere and no one can say you don't belong. She smiled and skipped ahead. Yalan watched her disappear into the crowd. His voice had reached someone who had never met him. That was the legacy he wanted. Not applause, not awards, but quiet shifts that echoed forward. He pulled out his phone and opened a message from his father. Just saw the news. Another airline is adopting your seat equality policy. Proud does not even begin to cover it. Yalan smiled. The kind that lives not on the face but deep in the chest. He had once boarded a plane alone and left it ashamed. Now he walked through airports knowing his story lived in policies and people. He had taken pain and turned it into a platform. He had taken silence and turned it into a standard. He had shown that one seat, once denied, could become a movement. For many, and in that truth, his journey found its full meaning. The end.